On the morning of April 17, 1975, heavily armed teenage guerrilla fighters marched into the crowded streets of Phnom Penh. Within hours, they issued an evacuation order that forced over 2 million residents out of the capital at gunpoint, pushing them into the rural countryside without time to pack. This was the beginning of Year Zero, an ideological campaign to wipe out all traces of Cambodian history, culture, and modern society. Over the next 4 years, it would claim the lives of a quarter of the country's population. Historical accounts often struggle to explain how an obscure, highly disorganized band of rebels managed to capture an entire nation so quickly. The Khmer Rouge's reign of terror was the cataclysmic byproduct of global superpowers using Cambodia as a dispensable chessboard. The path to power began in Paris in the early 1950s. There, a young student named Saloth Sar, who would later call himself Pol Pot, absorbed Marxist literature and began dreaming of a classless, agrarian society entirely purged of Western influence. For over a decade after Sar's returned home, the movement remained weak and contained under the neutral government of Prince Norodom Sihanouk. This changed as the war intensified in neighboring Vietnam. In 1969, the Nixon administration began targeting North Vietnamese supply lines hidden inside neutral Cambodian territory. The United States launched a secret carpet-bombing campaign. Over the next 4 years, American B-52s dropped more explosives on rural Cambodia than the U.S. dropped on Japan during the entirety of World War II. The bombardment dismantled the agricultural economy, destroying crops and driving massive waves of displaced peasants deeper into the country. The resulting starvation and displacement became central to Khmer Rouge propaganda. They used the bomb craters and civilian death toll to radicalize survivors against foreign influence. When a 1970 U.S.-backed coup led by Marshal Lon Nol finally ousted Prince Sihanouk, the political structure of the country collapsed, allowing the Khmer Rouge to transform from a fringe rebel group into an unstoppable military force. After seizing complete control in April 1975, the Khmer Rouge rebranded the nation as Democratic Cambodia. They enforced their ideology by abolishing money, banning religion, closing schools, and outlawing all private property. Citizens were forced into agrarian labor camps, children were separated from their families to be raised by the state, and the population was stripped of individual identity, right down to the mandatory black clothing. Internal paranoia within the leadership led to the creation of interrogation centers like S-21. Here, thousands of people, including the regime's own soldiers, were tortured and executed as suspected traitors. By 1979, an estimated 1.5 to 2 million people had died from forced labor, starvation, and execution. The attempt to artificially force a rural communist society resulted in the death of nearly a quarter of the population. In late 1978, the regime was brought down. Vietnam, backed by the Soviet Union, invaded Cambodia and successfully ousted the Khmer Rouge. Instead of welcoming the end of the genocide, the international community reacted with hostility toward the new Vietnamese-backed government. Driven by anti-Soviet Cold War priorities, the United States and China successfully pushed to allow the ousted Khmer Rouge to retain Cambodia's official seat at the United Nations. For over a decade, international aid and military equipment reached the Khmer Rouge in exile along the Thai border, effectively shielding the perpetrators from prosecution. The prioritization of Cold War alliances over human rights actively prolonged the survival and legitimacy of the Khmer Rouge leadership long after their atrocities were known. It wasn't until 2003 that the United Nations and the Cambodian government established a joint tribunal to try the surviving architects of the genocide. The tribunal operated under a specific restriction. Its jurisdiction was limited exclusively to crimes committed between April 1975 and January 1979. This narrow window omitted the years of secret U.S. bombings that destabilized the country before the genocide, as well as the international diplomatic support provided to the Khmer Rouge after their fall. When smaller nations are treated as sideshows in a geopolitical game, the search for truth often stops where it begins to threaten the interests of the powerful.